1971, How We Won by Charlotte T. Zitlow. Foreword. I was hardwired early to be a Bloomington booster. In 1958, when I was 9, living with my parents and little brother in a house split into a duplex on East University Street, Bloomington, was named an All-American City. The first Hoosier city honored since the National Civic League began the award in 1949. The League said the award recognizes communities that leverage civic engagement, collaboration, inclusiveness, and innovation to successfully address local issues. Was that true of Bloomington in 1958? Don't ask me. I didn't know the city had received an award. Even if I had, I wouldn't have cared or understood things like inclusiveness. I was 9. I cared about Superman, the Lone Ranger, Roy Rogers, cap pistols, and sports. Yet I was mightily impressed by the award. It was the sign that got me. On the north edge of town, city fathers had posted a sign, red, white, and blue, in the shape of an interstate sign, proclaiming Bloomington an all-American city. I recognized this as a high honor because, as a budding IU basketball fanatic, I knew there was nothing better than being an All-American. Like Hoosier center Archie Dees, named to the All-American team that year, this ultimate imprimatur colored the way I thought of Bloomington from then on. The Bloomington where I came of age in the 50s and early 60s was a monochromatic dollhouse like the fictional town of Mayfield where Leave It to Beaver was set. The show confirmed the world around me. The mayor of Bloomington looked like my doctor, who looked like my dentist, who looked like my school principal, and they all looked like Ward Cleaver, white, middle-aged men. I was blind to all that, blissfully ignorant, the privilege of being a white middle-class kid in a stable, peaceful community. I can't remember a single crisis that rocked my world, defined by the tight family neighborhoods around Elm Heights and later Rogers Elementary, with their gravel alleys and connected backyards and unlocked doors. The Bloomington beyond our backyards, the square, the IU campus, seemed an extension of that orderly universe. Our dinner table conversation was lively. My father, a music professor at IU, was against the Vietnam War before I was. My mother, a Holocaust survivor from Ukraine and a piano instructor at IU, felt a special kinship with Black students and supported their various campus protests. I protested tuition hikes in Dunn Meadow and canvassed for Robert Kennedy in the 1968 Indiana presidential primary. Oddly, the one thing I don't ever remember being discussed in our home was local politics or government. This might be an example of what Bill Clinton would call a high-class problem, a sign that we had no serious grievances, e.g. a proposed cement plant in our backyard, or unmet needs, water and sewer, garbage pickup. I'm sure my parents had no clue who represented us on the city council. I certainly didn't. All I had was that fixed gauzy image of a white middle-aged conservative man as the eternal face of authority in Bloomington. That made me a genuine babe in the woods as part of the Herald telephone team covering the 1971 city election. Imagine my surprise arriving at a candidate forum to discuss the issues and finding, opposite the Robert Hall Republicans, a Democratic rainbow coalition of professors, genders, sartorial styles, sexual orientations, and ages. Where had all these people been? They all had this in common: ideas, plans, critiques of the status quo. Their campaign slogan was a better way, earnest, respectful, modestly aspirational. The candidate debates over zoning, recycling, mass transit, the whole panoply of local governance were vigorous, substantive, and polite. The way we were before cable, social media, and the politics of personal destruction. For the first time, American foreign policy was an issue in the city election. Mark McCloskey, the Democratic candidate for mayor, spoke at a protest against the Vietnam War outside City Hall, addressing a crowd of mostly IU students newly eligible to vote due to the 26th Amendment. It was a striking sign of the times, but the maxim that all politics is local prevailed. Democrats knocked on doors and wore out shoe leather, says ringleader Charlotte Zitlow. We were very good at listening. Not a skill Republicans had cause to practice much during years of quiescent cruise control governing. The outcome of the 1971 election was more revolution than evolution. All 9 members of the city council and the mayor were white, middle-aged men. The council consisted of 7 businessmen, ranging from banking and insurance to car sales, groceries, and appliance repair, plus a veterinarian and a professor of chemistry. The mayor was a former school teacher. Only the appliance repairman, Jack Morrison, survived. The other incumbents were replaced by a gay community organizer, a bearded computer specialist, a soil and water conservation officer, a professor of gross anatomy, a shoe salesman, an ordained minister, a professor of religion, also an ordained minister, and the author of this book, a housewife, community activist, with a PhD in linguistics. The Rainbow Coalition of 1971 and successive like-minded councils transformed Bloomington, but the human infrastructure for change had been there all along, dormant, until leaders like Zitlow came along to catalyze it. As Leonard Cohen sang of America in Democracy, it's here they got the range and the machinery for change, and it's here they got the spiritual thrust. By the late 70s, the Tibetan Mongolian Buddhist Temple and Cultural Center, established by the Dalai Lama's older brother, had made Bloomington one of the most important centers for Tibetan Buddhism in North America. In 1980, the city mothers and fathers placed a sculpture on the north edge of town, not so far from the All-American sign named Red, Blonde, Black, and Olive. The work by the late IU sculptor Jean-Paul Daru, twin blocks of stone with 4 carved faces representing different races, is meant to express the diversity and unity of mankind and to promote universal understanding. Daru inscribed a message on the sculpture that starts, "In this place where breath alone connects us, we organize the earth as cities, lighting up the map. We are the world's many pulsing hearts, as families, branching out, till peace breaks out." Bloomington, meanwhile, remained a work in progress. It was not until 1991 that the first African-American, Paul Swain, was elected to the city council. I loved Bloomington in 1958 for what it was then. I love it even more for what it has become. The All-American City for all Americans. Greg Dawson. Prelude. On November 9, 2016, life in the United States changed dramatically. We suddenly had a new president who was unpredictable, communicated in totally idiosyncratic ways, was new to government, ignored precedent, scorned propriety, and promised to do things his way. Meanwhile, all around us in the world there is turmoil and change. In this country, the world's richest nation, economic equality has become considerably worse over the years. Small towns are disintegrating, communities breaking up, and major issues, social justice, healthcare, opioid abuse, epidemics, education, all stand in great need of serious help. It's a bit of a mess. It doesn't feel good. What can we do? For better or worse, this is not the first time in our nation's history. It isn't even the first time in my life when things have seemed so intractable. The Depression, World War II, the Korean conflict, the Cold War, the McCarthy era, the House Un-American Activities Committee, the assassinations of the 60s, the small police actions abroad that morphed into large wars, the whole ongoing struggle for racial equality and prosperity. There have been so many, even in my lifetime, and very few have been resolved. But for many, we have found solutions, and as we live our lives, perhaps 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, we continue to try. 50 years ago in southern Indiana, a group of us tried. We were living in Bloomington, the seat of Monroe County, Indiana. Bloomington is the county's only city, larger by far than its only other incorporated places, the town of Ellisville and the village of Steinsville, and home to the main campus of the state's flagship institution of higher education, Indiana University. Yet compared to the rest of the world with its intractable problems, it was a provincial small town. What difference could we make in the world? We knew at least that we could make a difference where we were. We chose to band together around an agenda developed by us and our neighbors and work to bring it to reality. In 1970, when I was 37 years old, I had just returned to Bloomington from a year with my family in Bratislava. It was then Czechoslovakia. We were there a year after the Warsaw Pact rolled into their country, which had been flourishing under the Prague Spring into a new socialism with a human face. The Soviet bloc takeover was a devastating blow to the Slovaks and the Czechs and the Moravians and the Hungarians in that advanced country. We were there while purges of the supporters of Alexander Dubek were just beginning, and the people's lives were diminishing before our eyes under the punitive anti-revolutionary machine. In a country where it was against the law to speak negatively about the government, we listened to the U.S. government-funded radio, the Voice of America, and heard commenters decrying the unacceptable expansion of the Vietnam War in Cambodia. We realized that even with all the stressful tensions of the war in Indochina, the difficult challenges to the civil rights movement, and many other areas of change in the U.S., we still could work to improve our democracy. So when I got back in late summer of 1970, I organized a precinct to help re-elect the first senator who opposed the war in Vietnam, Vance Harty. Others in Bloomington, the town my husband and I had moved to in 1964, also worked. We helped get them re-elected by a slim margin, but elected he was. And then, most amazingly, a number of us got together almost by accident and decided to change the way our town was being run. We organized, we focused, we worked hard, we listened, we talked with hundreds and hundreds of people we didn't know. We won the election, we changed the way things were being done, we changed the priorities, we created a city while working to preserve the good aspects of the previous administration. As a top priority, we worked to assure that citizens were included in decision-making and priority setting. We tried our best to make it government for the people and of the people. While some things in our southern Indiana home have reverted to old form and some power has shifted away from citizens to businesses, the major changes have remained. Meanwhile, we still need to remind those in power that they are there for us, and that's what a democracy is all about.